The historic Kennedy caucus room inside the Russell Senate office building buzzed with energy as lawmakers, reporters, and education advocates gathered for the annual Federal Education Policy Conference. The grand, wood-paneled chamber had hosted some of the most defining moments in his history, from the Watergate hearings to Supreme Court confirmations. But today it was about to witness something different, a rare moment of genuine bipartisan respect. Senator Patty Murray, chair of the Senate Education Committee and the highest-ranking woman in Senate leadership, walked to the podium with her familiar, composed stride. Known for her focus on real policy solutions rather than political drama, she was expected to discuss the new bipartisan education bill that had just passed. Instead, she paused, looked across the room, and put aside her prepared remarks. "Before I begin today's policy discussion," she said with quiet authority, "I want to take a moment to recognize someone whose dedication to expanding educational opportunity deserves our attention." The camera turned toward Representative Jasmine Crockett, seated among her colleagues. Her expression changed from polite attentiveness to true surprise. Murray continued, "Representative Crockett's leadership on the Education and Workforce Committee has shown what public service is meant to be, not chasing headlines, but achieving real results that improve lives." The crowd grew still. It was an unusual sight in Washington, a senior senator publicly honoring a newer member from the opposite chamber, not out of strategy but from sincere admiration. Over the next hour, the event reminded everyone why public service matters and how genuine leadership can still inspire the next generation of Americans. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories where integrity and purpose rise above partisanship. 2. Understand the depth of that moment. We must look at the journeys that brought both women to this point. Patty Murray's story began far from political power. The daughter of a World War II veteran who ran a small five-and-dime store, she grew up in Washington state learning the importance of community and hard work. When her father developed multiple sclerosis, Murray witnessed how illness could devastate a family, an experience that later drove her passion for healthcare reform. Her path into politics was born not of ambition, but necessity. As a preschool volunteer, she traveled to the state capitol to fight proposed cuts to a parent-child education program. When a legislator dismissed her as just a mom in tennis shoes, she turned the remark into a campaign slogan and went on to win a seat on the school board. Then the state Senate, and finally, the U.S. Senate in 1992. Senator Murray never forgot why she entered public service, said political analyst Jennifer Lawless. She's built a reputation not on rhetoric or theatrics, but on practical policy work that affects real families. Over more than 3 decades, Murray earned bipartisan respect for her dedication to education, healthcare, veterans affairs, and workforce development. She rarely sought the spotlight, instead focusing on the hard, often uncelebrated work of crafting legislation that actually passes. Representative Jasmine Crockett's journey to Congress followed a different but equally principled path. After graduating from Rhodes College and the University of Houston Law Center, she built her career as a civil rights attorney in Texas, fighting for people who lacked access to justice. Her legal work centered on expanding educational access and breaking down barriers to economic opportunity, her former law partner told the Texas Tribune. Jasmine is all about solving real problems, identifying what holds people back, and finding workable solutions. When Crockett won her congressional seat in 2022, many expected her to choose a high-profile committee. Instead, she requested a role on the Education and Workforce Committee. When asked why, she said simply, "Education changed my life. I want every child to have that same ladder of opportunity." From her first term onward, Crockett focused on substantive results over showmanship. She spent time in classrooms, met with educators, and worked across the aisle to craft policies that actually make a difference. What made Senator Murray's recognition so meaningful was that the two women shared no political alliance or strategic connection. They came from different generations, regions, and chambers of Congress. Murray had nothing to gain politically by highlighting Crockett's work, and that's exactly what made the moment so powerful. Both women have built their careers on the same foundation: substance over spectacle, focusing on progress that lasts instead of noise that fades. It was a rare and refreshing reminder that authentic leadership still exists in American politics. The Education Policy Conference had brought the two women together because both had played major roles in creating the Rural Education Opportunity Act, a bill designed to expand support and resources for schools in underserved rural communities. Senator Patty Murray had led the charge in the Senate, while Representative Jasmine Crockett had worked tirelessly in the House to build bipartisan backing for the measure. Neither woman could have predicted that their brief encounter that morning in the Kennedy caucus room would not only highlight their shared dedication to public service, but also inspire a new generation of young leaders watching across the country. What moments of genuine recognition have you seen in your own life? Share in the comments below how meaningful acknowledgement has shaped someone's journey. Sometimes, even a few words of appreciation can change everything. After opening her remarks by recognizing Crockett, Senator Murray turned back to the podium to begin her formal speech on education policy. Everyone expected her to move on with the planned agenda, but instead she surprised the room once again. "I want to take a few moments," she said, "to explain exactly why Representative Crockett's work in education deserves attention." Setting her prepared notes aside, she added, "In a time when politics often rewards noise over results, her approach shows what real public service looks like." As the C-SPAN cameras zoomed in, Crockett's face showed visible surprise as Murray began, describing specific parts of her work that most people, even inside Washington, had never heard about. Murray explained how, when the Rural Education Opportunity Act was struggling to gain support in the House, Crockett didn't respond with public criticism or partisan attacks. Instead, she did something rare in modern politics. She listened. Murray recounted how Crockett had organized a series of roundtable discussions with rural educators from both Democratic and Republican districts. Instead of dictating solutions, she created space for teachers, parents, and administrators to share their real experiences from the classroom. "The bill we passed last month," Murray said, "includes several key provisions that came directly from those conversations." Crockett had ensured the law reflected the actual needs of rural communities rather than distant assumptions from Washington. Murray then outlined 3 specific contributions Crockett made to the bill, improvements that hadn't made headlines but had dramatically strengthened the final law. First, Crockett had spotted a technical flaw in the funding formula that would have accidentally directed money away from the most underserved districts. Her close attention to such fine details made sure the funding truly reached schools in need. Second, she had worked closely with Republican colleagues to include accountability safeguards that protected taxpayer dollars, while still giving schools the flexibility to meet local challenges. This compromise helped secure rare bipartisan support. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Crockett had pushed for teacher retention measures in rural areas. Drawing on her discussions with educators, she highlighted that housing costs and professional isolation were key barriers. Her efforts led to new provisions addressing both. "None of these changes made front-page news," Murray said. Representative Crockett didn't issue press statements or post viral clips. She simply focused on results, not recognition. As Murray spoke, the room's atmosphere began to shift. Staffers who had been glancing at their phones looked up, realizing this was something real, not a routine political speech. Reporters who came expecting the usual talking points suddenly began typing furiously, aware that they were witnessing an authentic moment of respect in Washington. "In my 30 years in the Senate," Murray continued, "I've learned that the most effective public servants aren't always the loudest. They're the ones who do their homework, build trust across differences, and keep government working for the people it's meant to serve." Then, she shared a personal story that surprised even her longtime staff. "When I was a young state senator," she said, "a senior colleague once took a moment to recognize the work I'd done on a child care bill. That simple act didn't just make me feel valued, it reminded me why public service matters, especially on the days when it feels exhausting or overlooked. Looking directly at Crockett, Murray added, "Today I want to pay that forward." Because honoring meaningful work isn't just about the individual being recognized. It's about reminding all of us what genuine, results-driven leadership looks like. The camera panned to a group of college interns attending the conference. Their faces revealed how deeply the moment resonated with them. Seeing one leader publicly honor another across generations and chambers was reshaping their understanding of political leadership. It showed them that even in a divided climate, integrity, humility, and collaboration could still shine through. As Senator Murray prepared to shift back to her official policy address, something completely unexpected happened. A Washington Post journalist sitting in the front row would later write that this moment pierced through the cynicism that often clouds modern political reporting. For a few minutes, it revealed something rare, a glimpse of the authentic commitment to public service that still exists. Beneath the daily partisan noise dominating the headlines, what no one expected was how Representative Crockett would respond, or how that response would turn what might have been a courteous acknowledgement into an experience with lasting meaning for students and future public servants across the nation. After completing her formal policy remarks, Senator Patty Murray opened the floor for audience questions. When the session ended, the atmosphere shifted to friendly networking, the typical close of such conferences. Attendees clustered in small groups, many approaching Representative Jasmine Crockett to congratulate her on the unexpected recognition she had received from Murray. Photographers captured the moment when Murray crossed the crowded room to greet Crockett personally. Instead of offering the usual quick handshake for the cameras, the two women shared an earnest, 15-minute conversation that drew quiet attention from those nearby. This wasn't a photo op, observed Dr. Margaret Chun, director of the Congressional Fellowship Program, who watched the exchange closely. It was a senior leader taking real time to connect with a younger colleague in a way that felt entirely genuine. Later that same afternoon, Senator Murray had a scheduled meeting with student leaders from several Washington State universities visiting Capitol Hill when she invited Crockett to join her. What might have been a routine briefing unexpectedly became something much more meaningful. In the historic Senate reception room, about 20 students gathered expecting a standard talk about careers in government. Instead, they witnessed an unscripted, heartfelt conversation between two lawmakers that revealed the personal side of leadership rarely seen in the media. Representative Crockett, Murray began, setting aside her prepared notes. Could you share with these students how you build relationships with colleagues who hold very different political views? Crockett paused before answering, her honesty immediately capturing the students' attention. When I first came to Congress, she said, I felt enormous pressure to make an impact through confrontation. Cable news and social media reward the loudest voices, the most divisive sound bites. She took a breath. But I remembered why I ran for office. Not to be on television, but to create opportunities for communities like the one I came from. That meant focusing on what could actually get done, not what would just make headlines. She went on to explain how she had made a deliberate effort to build relationships with representatives from rural districts, many of whom held starkly different views. I didn't go into those meetings trying to change their core beliefs, Crockett said. I started by listening, asking what their communities needed, and finding the human connection underneath all the politics. One student asked how she handled the public criticism that so many lawmakers face online. Crockett nodded knowingly. That's one of the hardest parts of public life today, she admitted. There's constant pressure to fight back against every comment or insult, even when that only fuels division. Staying focused on the real work is a daily choice. Senator Murray agreed. When I entered the Senate in 1992, she reflected, we didn't have Twitter or 24-hour cable coverage demanding instant reactions. There was more room to build relationships quietly, the kind of groundwork that lasting legislation depends on. How do you manage that pressure now? Another student asked. Murray smiled gently before replying. I remind myself every day why I'm here, not to win news cycles, but to improve people's lives. That means sometimes accepting criticism without responding, especially when arguing back would only distract from the mission. As their conversation continued, the students realized they were witnessing something special. Two public servants from different generations sharing raw, honest insights about leadership, compromise, and perseverance. When a student asked about maintaining work-life balance, Crockett offered a deeply personal answer. "Every weekend when I return home," she said, "I visit at least one school in my district, not for cameras or press releases, but to remind myself who I'm working for. The students who need a fair chance. The teachers who give everything they have. The families counting on education to build a better future." What made this exchange so powerful was its authenticity. There were no rehearsed lines, no staged sound bites. Both Murray and Crockett spoke with striking candor about the gap between how politics looks from the outside and what it truly feels like to fight for meaningful change from within. As the meeting wrapped up, a freshman from Washington State University asked what many considered the most important question of the day. "With all the dysfunction we see in politics," she began, "why should any of us even consider public service as a career?" Senator Patty Murray looked toward Representative Jasmine Crockett, then turned back to the student. "Because despite what you see on the news," she said, "there are still people like Representative Crockett, people who lead with integrity, who care more about results than recognition, and who remember that the heart of public service is making government work better for those who need it most." Crockett nodded and added, "And because real change happens through the efforts of people who show up, not for fame or power, but with patience and persistence to make systems fairer from the inside." As the session ended, many students lingered to speak personally with both lawmakers. What had been planned as an ordinary Q&A became unexpectedly a masterclass in principled leadership. The influence of that discussion quickly extended beyond the room. Students began sharing reflections on social media, their posts gaining rapid attention for their unexpectedly hopeful tone. Amid today's often cynical political environment, today I witnessed something I didn't think existed anymore. Public officials driven by service. "Not self-promotion," wrote Maya Johnson, a political science major. "It's changed how I think about my own future in ways I'm still processing." By that evening, short video clips from the student discussion had spread across platforms, sparking a rare kind of national conversation, one that focused not on partisan rivalry, but on shared values like integrity, respect, and commitment to the common good. The immediate aftermath of Senator Murray's recognition and her mentoring exchange with students showed just how deeply people hunger for authentic leadership that transcends party lines. Within days, clips of both Murray's public recognition and the student dialogue had been viewed more than 7 million times. Across social media, what stood out most was the cross-partisan response. "I don't agree with either Murray or Crockett politically," wrote one conservative commentator, "but I respect that they're focused on substance over spectacle." We need more of that across the board. Progressive voices echoed the same sentiment. In an era dominated by performative politics, noted podcast host Maria Sanchez, watching two women quietly doing serious policy work reminds us what government should actually be about. Educational organizations especially emphasize the mentorship dynamic between the two lawmakers. The National Education Association praised the exchange as an example of leadership that bridges generations and strengthens democratic institutions, but the most profound impact came not from Washington, but from what followed across the country. 1 month after the Kennedy Caucus Room recognition, an unexpected movement began spreading through college campuses nationwide. Inspired by what became known as the Murray-Crockett Exchange, student governments from schools across the political spectrum launched a series of common ground conversations, structured discussions built around discovering shared values beneath political differences. What stood out about that moment between Senator Murray and Representative Crockett, explained James Henderson, student body president at a southeastern university, was that it wasn't about compromising principles. It was about realizing that diverse perspectives can lead to better outcomes when there's mutual respect. These campus programs deliberately rejected the confrontational tone that dominates online debate, modeling instead the collaborative, solutions-first approach both Murray and Crockett demonstrated 3 months later. When Representative Crockett returned to her district for a town hall at a local community college, she was approached by Teresa Mendez, a high school government teacher who had shown her students the viral video of the student session. "My students have watched that exchange a dozen times," Mendez told her. "They've even started a Solutions First Club, a group where they practice discussing tough issues by beginning with shared goals instead of partisan talking points." Similar stories began emerging from classrooms across the country. Educators were using the Murray-Crockett example as a teaching tool for civic education, showing students that effective governance depends not on conflict, but on building relationships across differences while staying grounded in principled goals. 6 months later, Murray and Crockett sat down together again, this time for a PBS special titled Democracy in Practice. When asked about the extraordinary reaction to their exchange, Senator Murray's response explained exactly why it had resonated so deeply. "What we demonstrated wasn't exceptional," she said. "It was simply authentic. Throughout my career, I've seen that most people in public service, regardless of party, genuinely want to make government work better for their communities. That basic truth often gets lost in coverage that values conflict over cooperation." Crockett nodded. Senator Murray's recognition reminded me that the most meaningful work often happens off-camera. The provisions in that education bill that will help students in rural areas won't make headlines, but they'll make a real difference in people's lives. Their exchange, and everything that followed, stood as a powerful reminder. Genuine leadership isn't loud, it's lasting. It begins with listening, continues through collaboration, and leaves behind not just policy wins, but people inspired to believe again in the possibility of public service with purpose. That, ultimately, is the measure that truly matters. During their in-depth interview, both Senator Murray and Representative Crockett reflected on how they balance the pressure to perform for headlines with their commitment to real results. There's enormous pressure on elected officials to perform outrage instead of pursuing progress, Murray admitted. Resisting that pull means constantly reminding yourself why you chose public service in the first place. Crockett agreed. "I keep a folder filled with letters from people in my district whose lives have been directly impacted by the policies I've worked on," she shared. "Whenever I'm tempted to react to the noise or get drawn into online outrage, I reread those letters. They remind me what truly matters." Perhaps the most meaningful outcome of their collaboration came when Senator Murray announced the Public Service Mentorship Initiative, a bipartisan program pairing experienced lawmakers with newer members from both parties. "What started as a spontaneous moment of recognition," Murray explained at the program's launch, "has evolved into a structured effort to strengthen how Congress governs through mentorship and collaboration, because democracy depends not only on election results, but on how those entrusted with power carry out their duties." The initiative centers on the less glamorous but most essential aspects of public work, learning how to draft effective legislation, build coalitions, and navigate institutional processes to deliver concrete results. Participants agree to meet monthly without staff or media present, creating a private environment for authentic conversation and cross-party learning. When asked why she started such a program as she neared the end of her long Senate career, Murray's answer captured the spirit of her exchange with Crockett. "Democracy doesn't endure through grand speeches or dramatic gestures," she said. "It survives through the steady, consistent work of people who focus on solving problems rather than scoring political points. My hope is that this program helps nurture that mindset across party lines." A year after their initial meeting in the Kennedy caucus room, Murray invited Crockett to speak alongside her at Washington State University, Murray's alma mater. Addressing graduating seniors, the two offered powerful reflections on what public service means in practice. showing how their relationship had evolved from a single moment of recognition into a genuine, ongoing partnership. Murray spoke first, acknowledging the deep skepticism many young people feel about government. "That doubt isn't misplaced," she admitted. "Given what dominates the news, it's understandable. But beneath the noise and constant conflict, there are still people in government working sincerely to improve lives and strengthen communities." She gestured toward Crockett. Representative Crockett represents what public service should stand for, not chasing attention, but staying focused on achieving outcomes that make a meaningful difference. When Crockett took the stage, her message reflected how much Murray's mentorship had shaped her own approach to leadership. "The greatest lesson I've learned from Senator Murray," she said, "is that real leadership often means giving up recognition in order to get real results. The challenge isn't choosing between staying true to your principles and working effectively within the system. The real test is finding ways to live your principles through patient, steady engagement with the work of governance." As the ceremony neared its close, Murray offered wisdom drawn from decades of public service. "Throughout history," she told the graduates, "democracy hasn't been sustained by those who shout the loudest or chase the most attention. It endures because of people who serve with humility, persistence, and a genuine dedication to the common good." Crockett added, "And by those who remember that even beneath our fiercest political differences lie shared hopes for our communities and our country, hopes that can only be realized when we treat governance not as a battle to win, but as a duty to fulfill." Their joint message to the next generation of leaders was simple yet profound. True public service demands both courage and humility. The courage to stand firm on values and the humility to listen, learn, and build bridges where possible. When the graduates rose for a standing ovation, many were visibly moved by this alternative vision of leadership, one grounded not in conflict or spectacle, but in the steady, quiet work of making government serve people effectively. This, they concluded, is the kind of principled leadership America needs most today. Leadership that measures success not by attention gained, but by lives improved. Not by battles won, but by progress achieved. Not by divisions deepened, but by common ground discovered. If you found this story of authentic public service inspiring, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that highlight how integrity-driven leadership can strengthen our democracy. Together, we can promote a vision of politics focused not on conflict, but on shared purpose and lasting progress.